Welcome to our webinar, the new GMAT, what this means for you. My name is Nelly and I'll be the moderator on behalf of the Prep Advisor team. And I'm here with our speaker today, Sergey Kouk, who is a senior trainer at GMAT Master, and he has worked with thousands of clients over the past 10 plus years. Sergey is going to talk about the new GMAT format, and he will give you advice on whether you should wait or take the test now. Before giving the word to him, I want to tell everyone who is listening, you can ask questions anytime during the webinar, just using the Q&A box or the chat. Any questions are welcome, so don't hesitate. Okay, I think everything is set now, so I'm giving the word to you, Sergey.
Okay, thank you so much, Nelly, and thanks everyone, wherever you are. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Let me know actually in the chat box, where are you right now at the moment, so that I could see where people are coming from. I'm located in Toronto, Canada, and it's a really nice, beautiful weather outside. So please introduce yourself in the chat box as well. And while you're doing this, I actually want to introduce you to the GMAT. Of course, we are talking about the new versus old GMAT. I want to make sure that we actually understand what the GMAT is all about, because the interesting thing that you will learn today is that the GMAT is changing, but it's not actually changing as much as most people think. And we're going to go over these changes and what it actually means for you, and whether you should wait or whether you should take the test right now, and whether if you've already been studying, all of your studies are going to be out the window, you can still use them going forward. So we'll talk about all of that. I wanted to show you a couple of GMAT questions just so that you could see what to expect on the GMAT. So the first question I wanted to show you is a problem-solving question. You have a question. Here's actually the question. It is a multiple choice question. So one of the answers of the ones you see here on the screen is correct, and the other ones are not. So what I'd like to do is maybe give you about a minute and a half to try to figure out what is the correct answer. I will, though, ask you to please not use a calculator or try to Google this question or use the chat GPT to solve this question. Just use pen and paper. This is really all you need. So I'm going to give you about 90 seconds. And once you think you know what the answer is, please put it in the chat box. Okay, I see some answers coming in. I'll give you another 30 seconds, and then afterwards we'll talk about this question. So once you think you know what the answer is, A, B, C, D, or E, just please put it in the chat box. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I see one person for C, one person for D, and everybody else. What's your answer? Do you have an answer? Did you find this question challenging? Maybe it's been a while ago since you've done some sort of questions like this. So let me show you the way that we've done these questions, or we used to do these questions in high school. Now, I call this the high school way. We also like to call it jokingly the work hard way, right? Because, I mean, you have to work hard to do well on the GMAT, and we're all hardworking people. So here's what we can do. Now, we are given the ratio of pigs to chickens, it's 13 to 28. However, this doesn't mean that we have 13 pigs and 28 chickens. We could actually have any sort of a multiple of 13 and 28. For example, we could have 130 pigs and 280 chickens. So we have a multiplier. Let's call this n. So therefore, we have 13n pigs and 28n chickens. Afterwards, we are adding 15 more pigs. So now the new number of pigs is 13n plus 15. We are also given a new ratio. So we could actually divide 13n plus 15, which is a new number of pigs, by the same number of chickens, 28n. That new ratio is 4/7. Oh, we have an equation with simply one unknown. We can go ahead and solve for n. And if you do that, I'll give it you about 90 seconds, but most people take about 3 minutes to solve it. We need to remember how to find that n, how, again, to manipulate these linear equations, how to deal with fractions. And if you find n, it's actually going to be 5. And then we could calculate the number of pigs, the number of chickens, add them up, and the answer is actually B, the answer that nobody got. So this is how we used to do things in high school. But the GMAT is not a test of high school math. And that's actually very important to understand. So instead of working hard, let's try to work smart. We also like to call this the mastery way, which is a more advanced way. And I'll show you what the GMAT really expects from you. I'll give you a quote from the GMAT, people who make the test. So here's how you would do this question if you were to treat this question as a GMAT question and not as a high school question. We were told that for every 13 pigs, we have 28 chickens. So the ratio of 13 to 28. Now, what does this mean? Of course, you can't have half a chicken or half a pig, certainly not on a farm. So the ratio needs to contain the whole number of pigs and the whole number of chickens. That's why if you add 13 more pigs, you need to add 28 more chickens. And really what this means is that the total number of pigs must be divisible by 13, the total number of chickens must be divisible by 28. So whatever number I have of pigs should always be a multiple of 13. Whatever number I have of chickens should always be a multiple of 28. That's how the ratio works. And of course, that also means that if I were to add pigs and chickens together, if I simply have 13 and 28, I'm going to have 41 animals. I add 13 more pigs, I add 28 more chickens. That means I add 41 additional animals. So that actually means that the total number of animals on a farm today is a multiple of 41. Let me ask you a question. How many of these answers are multiples of 41? Well, they're pretty close to each other. So obviously only one of them. Now we need to find the one that is actually a multiple of 41. Oh, let's see. 41 is almost 40, and 200 divided by 40 is 5. So which number will be 41 times 5? Well, of course, it's going to be 205. And we can do this without working hard, without using the calculator, and without spending too much time. So that's the GMAT. That's how it's different from high school. That's the question that's from the quantitative reasoning section. Let's do a question from the verbal reasoning section. Maybe we're not comfortable with numbers anymore. So let's deal with a question that doesn't contain any numbers. This is going to be a critical reasoning question. We have a passage. There's a question about that passage. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds or so to read this passage and try to make sense of it. There you go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am not going to yet ask you to answer the question. The question was under the passage. What I do want to ask you is a very simple question. And that is, in the time I've given you, which was about 45 seconds or so, how many times did you read this passage? Please let me know in the chat box. Do you read it once? Do you read it twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times? Let me know. Okay, 3 times. Yeah, I see people 3 times. Yeah, most people read it 3 times. Okay, and let me ask you this question. And again, another very simple question. After reading this passage, most of you 3 times, how much of this passage do you understand to be able to answer this question? Let's say on a scale of 0 to 10. 0 means I have no idea what I'm going to be doing and how I will be answering this question. And 10 means, yeah, I understand it pretty well. I know what to do next. So let me know. 0 to 10. Okay, maybe 6 to 7. Yeah. All right. So now that we've read the passage 3 times, we understand the question relatively well. What I want to do is show you the answer choices, and I'm going to ask you to choose what you think is the correct answer to this question. And just a reminder, the question was the statement above in boldface. That's the statement in the middle. Place which of the following roles in the ethicist's argument. So here you go. Here are 5 answer choices. I'll give you about 30 seconds or so to read through them. Once you think you know what the answer is, please put it in the chat box. And then we'll go over this question together. All right, I see a few people for B, a few people for D, and many people still haven't answered the question. So please choose an answer, even if you're not quite sure, it's okay. The only time when it really matters that you get the question right is on a real test. Right now, this is a chance for us to learn. So please choose whichever answer you think is correct. And if you didn't get it right, it's okay. You just learned something. Totally okay. We're going to play a little game. There are no wrong answers here. They're only the right answers, and they're the answers we can learn from. Okay. See some people for D, some people for E, some people for B. Well, let's go back to the passage. Now, this is a passage which is an argument by an ethicist, right? We are told that a statement plays some sort of a role in the ethicist's argument. So who's an ethicist? Did you ever meet a person, like you meet somebody at a party and say, hi, I'm an ethicist? Who? So in case you don't know who's an ethicist, that's a person who studies ethics. Probably some sort of a professor at a university who maybe writes books about ethics, right? So let me ask you a question. You're trying to get into a business school, you're trying to do the GMAT, so how much do you need to know about ethics? Do you have to be an expert in ethics? What do you think? Well, I think that you need to be ethical if you're trying to get into a business school, but you certainly don't have to be an expert in ethics. And that question isn't actually about ethics, right? It's about understanding how one statement plays some sort of a role in the whole argument. And that was the statement in the middle. So instead of understanding what this person is trying to say, what we should really understand is how this person is structuring the argument. That's much more important. So that means that instead of us focusing on all of these words that we might not understand, such as especially virtues, if they resist the desire to do what's wrong, I mean, I have to probably read it 10 times to understand what that means, but I might not need to understand that because the question isn't about that. The question is about the structure. And the words that help me understand the structure are the words that we all can understand. These are these words highlighted. The person is beginning by saying it would be a mistake to say something. That means somebody is wrong and I'm right as an ethicist. That's basically what this person is saying, right, in my own words. Okay, well, if I simply say somebody is wrong, people are not going to believe me. I should back up my thoughts. So I need what's called evidence to my claim that I just made. So what's my evidence? Well, one of the pieces of evidence that I provide is I'm saying, look, even though what these people are saying here is true, nevertheless, these people probably misinterpreted that evidence, something like that. Now, notice that the question was actually not about the entire argument, it was about that part in the middle, that statement that says, for although it is true that blah, 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 blah. So here's what we've learned. That part in the middle is supporting the author's claim that these people are wrong and she's right. And that particular statement, the author does agree with, right? She says, although this is true, right? Does everybody agree? Okay, so let's see what this means for our answer choices. Let's go to the answer choices now. The most popular answer is actually, when I do this question, is C. So let's take a look at C. C says it is a faulty claim. Now, what is a faulty claim? Yes, these people were wrong, but was the part in the middle, the bolded part, a faulty claim? Not really, no. They also said it is true, so I can stop reading C. It certainly cannot be the correct answer. How about D? It is according to the argument a commonly held opinion that is nevertheless false. They also said this is true, so how could it be false? No, D is also not the correct answer. E says it reports an observation that the argument claims is false. Okay, I can stop right now. No, certainly not false. So now I'm down to two answer choices. And of these two remaining answer choices, obviously only one could be correct. So I could look at A and figure out if it's right, or I could look at B and figure out if it's right. And then honestly, I don't have to look at the other one, because if one's right, the other one has to be wrong, and the other way around. So I want to be a little lazy and save some time here. I will look at A, just because it's a little shorter, which probably means also it's a little easier to understand. So let's take a look at A. It is a claim for which the argument attempts to provide justification. So that part in the middle was the claim of the author. Is that true? Actually not. Remember, the claim was these people are wrong, I'm right. And then the part in the middle, the bolded part, was actually the support for that claim. So that is why A is wrong and B has to be right. Honestly, at this point, I don't even care what B is saying. I just know everything else is wrong. One of them has to be right. It's the GMAT. There's always one correct answer and 4 incorrect answers in the quantitative and verbal reason sections. So I'm done. The answer is B. Now, that brings us to a very important point about the GMAT. And that is, you might be wondering, well, what would it take for me to get a very high score? Let's say a score above 700 on a current scale of scores. And I'll share with you how the exam is changing. But these types of questions, by the way, they exist on both the old and the new exam. And I'll tell you exactly what's the difference in just a few moments. But here's something very important to understand, is that the GMAT is a different test. Most of the tests that we have ever done were evaluating how well we know something. They're called knowledge-based tests. For example, at some point, I did my project management professional certification. And for that test, I had to read a book that's called the Project Management Body of Knowledge. I had to understand the 5 phases of the project and so on and so forth. See, on the GMAT, there is no such thing as the body of knowledge of the GMAT. And that's why if I simply read a book about the GMAT and memorize a bunch of formulas, it's probably not going to get me anywhere, because there is no such thing as the body of knowledge for the GMAT. Instead, the exam is measuring the skills, what the GMAT calls higher order reasoning skills. Now, think about this. If you've ever applied for a job, and if you read the job advertisement, chances are it had a section that's called skills. We need a person to have communication skills, problem-solving skills, critical thinking skills, time management skills, organizational skills, and all kinds of other skills. And there's usually not really a section that's called knowledge, unless you're applying to some very technical job. And honestly, if you've heard about things such as ChatGPT and artificial intelligence and the replacement of the knowledge-based economy with artificial intelligence and robots, that's the new industrial revolution. Many years ago, we had an industrial revolution. This is when people started producing things in factories. And then later on, we replaced them with robots, right? So people started producing Ford cars back in the early 20th century in a factory. So it was a lot more efficient because they had a conveyor. And then in early 2000s, we started producing cars without any assemblers. For example, on a Tesla plant, there's a grand total of 0 people assembling cars. Everything is assembled by robots. But the next phase of the Industrial Revolution, or the next phase of robot revolution, is a replacement of knowledge-based economy. And some of the jobs are actually not safe from the artificial intelligence. One of the jobs that is actually not very safe is the job of a lawyer. We teach the LSAT, which is a law school admission test. And many people are thinking about going to a law school, but honestly, the job of a lawyer is largely going to be outsourced to artificial intelligence in the future. We will need a lot fewer lawyers going forward. Because what the lawyers mostly do is they comb through past cases to figure out if this case is similar to that case so that we can argue things in court. Well, guess what? Artificial intelligence is so much better at doing this. So we are going to need a lot fewer people who are very skilled at arguing in court, but we won't quite need as many people combing through cases. Another job that's actually being outsourced by artificial intelligence is a job of a doctor. I know it sounds a little strange, but what do doctors mostly do is they diagnose and prescribe. Well, guess what? Artificial intelligence is so much better at doing this. And now AI is even doing surgeries because it's so much more precise. So that's why knowledge isn't that important anymore. What is important is the skill. And that's what the GMAT is testing. However, this is very different from how we've been educated. I don't know about you, but I was educated at the end of the 20th century. This is when I went to high school. And at that time, my teachers were telling me that knowledge is power. So basically what they were telling me is if I want to learn how to swim, all I have to do is sit nicely in a row and read a book on swimming, right? Do you really believe them? No, I actually need to do it, right? I need to develop the skills. And Michael Phelps, who has an ADHD, who probably didn't read that book, is the best swimmer in the world because he invested some time in developing the skill. And that's really what the GMAT's about. Now, let's take a look at the structure of the test real quick. This is the current structure of the test. You would notice that when I ask people, I do a lot of one-on-one consultations. And by the way, I'm going to be happy to do one with you. You can just go on our website, admitmaster.com, and book a one-on-one consultation. I'll be happy to spend about 20 minutes together going over your plans and giving you some feedback on how to study. And I'm doing a lot of these consultations. I was doing a couple of ones yesterday, and people were saying, wow, I didn't even know about that. I was studying for the GMAT for a year, and you're telling me things that I didn't even know, or I didn't read anywhere about the GMAT. So you're gonna save a ton of time, and I'll be willing to volunteer 20 minutes of my time because you took the time to come here today. So usually I ask people, well, tell me, what do you know about the GMAT, and what sections are there on the GMAT? And usually people say, well, I know there's math, I know there's English, and there's something else. The essay, I think. And then I show them the structure of the test. And you would notice that there's no word math, and there's also no word English. And this slide, actually, we belong to a small group of test prep organizations that get invited to go and visit GMAT at the headquarters. So I know the CEO of the GMAT, and we go there every year, and I actually go there next week. Exactly a week from now, I'm going to be at the GMAT headquarters in around Washington, DC, in the United States, and we'll be talking about the new GMAT, and we'll be sharing some ideas. And this was actually one of the things that I remember they shared many years ago. They said, look, make sure when you're talking to people, tell them there's no word math in the description of the GMAT. There's quantitative reasoning, there's verbal reasoning, there's integrated reasoning. This is all about reasoning and analytical skills. And in fact, even if you look at the question types that are currently on the GMAT, in the quantitative reasoning section, there are two question types. There's problem solving, which is a question that we saw, which most people think are about solving problems, but they're actually not. They are about using our problem-solving skills to arrive at an answer the quickest possible way. That's what it is. So the name sometimes could be a little deceiving. And then data sufficiency. This is a question type that doesn't even ask you to solve the problem. And it doesn't even ask you to find the correct answer. It simply asks you, is it possible to find the answer? And that's it. It's a bit of a mind shift. I do a lot of one-on-one coaching as well. And very often I would talk to people and I would just keep asking them questions about data sufficiency question. Just keep asking them different questions that are guiding them. And then eventually they have like a bulb in their head. They say, okay, now I finally got it. If I need to understand whether the information is sufficient to solve a problem, I don't actually need to solve it. I just simply have to ask myself a series of questions to figure out if the data is enough. I go through like a checklist. And then the verbal reasoning section, there's three question types: sentence correction, critical reasoning, and reading comprehension. Now, today we have only about an hour. This is more of an introduction with a focus on the new GMAT. But if you're interested to dig a little bit more into these types of questions, you can go ahead and register for our seminars. There's the GMAT Math Refresher, where we're going to talk about the quantitative reason section, and the GMAT Verbal Refresher, we will talk about the verbal reasoning section. All 5 different types of questions. And you can register for these at admitmaster.com. The next seminar is actually next Wednesday, the 21st of June. This is going to be actually the day after I'm going to be at the GMAT conference, and I'm sure I'm going to share a lot of very interesting insights from that conference because it will be just fresh off the press. So please make sure that you go on our website, and right on the homepage, you'll see links to register for this Math Refresher class next Wednesday. Now, here's something that's very important to understand, in addition to the fact that this is a skills-based test and not a knowledge-based test. This is a test that's very efficient in the algorithm. Right now, it takes 3 hours. It will take even less. It used to take 4 hours in the past. Now, some of the exams are much longer. I remember I was doing a CFA exam. It was like 8 hours or so. The GMAT's only 2 hours. Or going forward, it's going to be just about 2 hours. So how does the GMAT achieve such precision in evaluating your skills in just 2 hours? Well, the way it does it, it follows a computer adaptive algorithm. So what this means is that the exam doesn't simply ask you a bunch of easy questions, a bunch of medium, and a bunch of hard, and you basically, you might be wasting your time answering all these easy questions, or somebody might be wasting their time getting all of these hard questions wrong. So instead, what the GMAT does is it changes the difficulty of the questions depending on how you answer them, so that very quickly they can ask you a series of questions that are approximately at your level. And that's how they can figure out your score very accurately within a short time. We use a lot of adaptivity in our courses as well. For example, a lot of the exercises that you're going to be doing when you come to our classes are going to be adaptive as well, because we want to make sure that you are not wasting your time when you are studying for the GMAT with us. That also means, by the way, that you're not really going to be expecting, just like on some other tests, like maybe the LSAT, you're not really going to see a bunch of easy questions. For example, on the LSAT, about half of the questions are easy. Instead, you're going to see a lot of hard questions if you want a high score. And of course, the only way to get a high score is to see a lot of hard questions. So you're not getting more time, but you're getting harder questions than everybody else. Some people think it's unfair, but that's actually the only way to get to a high score. Now, you might be wondering, okay, so somebody's asking a question, Marek here, if I make mistakes early in the test, can I still get high results later? Now, you might have heard that there's a bit of a urban myth that you need to spend a lot of time getting the first 10 questions right, because if you don't, you'll never get a high score. Well, let's put it this way. The GMAT looks at your overall performance. And while the first impression is important, it's the overall impression that counts. I love analogies. So let me give you an analogy. Imagine you're going on a date or you're going for an interview. Now, it's important to make a good first impression. So the same thing on the GMAT. If you're going to go into the test and make a lot of careless mistakes right up front, it's going to be very hard to recover. But somebody who is performing really well at the beginning and trying really hard, maybe potentially spending a lot of time, by the time you get into hard questions, guess what? People run out of time. So it's important to maintain the overall performance. And yes, the first impression is important, but it's not as important as most people think. It's the overall impression that's important. Now, how is the GMAT changing? You probably have heard that there's a new GMAT Focus Edition. So it's going to be different from the old GMAT. And yet, if you look at the MBA.com website, you would notice that the GMAT has already shared all of the scoring algorithms and everything else, and they know exactly what the new scores are going to be. So how did they do that? Well, very simply. What they've actually done is they've taken the old GMAT and they've repackaged the questions. So the questions you're going to see on the new GMAT are actually exactly the same as the questions on the old GMAT, with a couple of exceptions. They've removed a couple of topics from the old GMAT. They emphasize some other topics a little bit more, and then they also changed the scoring algorithm. That's all they've done. So if you've already been preparing for the GMAT, guess what? You don't really have to do that much more. All you need to do is maybe take a couple practice tests. The practice tests are already available. We'll talk about the timeline in a moment, but the questions are going to be the same. The bulk of your studies is knowing how to deal with questions. A small part of your studies is also getting familiar with the algorithm, but that's a smaller part. And as you could see here, the exam gets reduced from 3 hours and 7 minutes to 2 hours and 15 minutes. So what have they done? First of all, they removed the essay. I mean, nobody really cares about writing essays anymore, right? I mean, we have ChatGPT, so who cares? And honestly, the essay part of the current GMAT is so easy that most of our students get a 6. And I can teach you in 45 minutes how to get a score of 6 on the essay. It's not that hard. And I don't remember the last time any of our students got score below 5, and the maximum score is 6. So very easy if you know what you're doing. But when it comes to the other sections, what the GMAT is also removing is geometry. So if you really worry about geometry questions like triangles and circles and other things, then it's not going to be on the new test. Though, I'll be honest with you, I personally love geometry because it's all about pictures. It's a visual math. So sometimes it's easier to deal with than something like a very complicated equation. At least you can visualize it. Right? But that's what's being removed as well. Another thing that's being removed is sentence correction questions. All of the sentence correction questions are going to be gone. The new GMAT will contain only critical reasoning and reading comprehension questions. Now, some people might say, wow, that's really good news because, I'm not comfortable with the English grammar, so all this sentence correction, why do we need that? But some other people might say, well, wait a second. Sentence correction questions are actually very short. There's only one sentence. And if you know what you're doing, you can deal with them in like 30 seconds or maybe a minute. But critical reason, reading comprehension, that takes time. You need to read them, you need to understand them. So if you ask me, the fact that we're removing sentence correction questions, which right now make up 40% of all of the questions in the verbal reason section, to me, that's bad news. Now, I would be worried because when I'm doing sentence correction, I know how to do them. I know what to look for. There are only about 10 different things that are really tested in sentence correction. So you don't have to know the entire English grammar. You just look for some very specific things. And if you know what you're looking for, you can deal with them very quickly. But the other things, critical reasoning, reading comprehension, yeah, that takes more time. What else is changing? Well, the way that the questions are going to be packaged in different sections is also changing. The new quantitative reason section will now contain only problem-solving questions, no more data sufficiency questions. To me, that's also bad news. Here's why I think it's bad news. In data sufficiency questions, you don't actually have to solve a problem. So all you need to do is just simply understand if it's possible, right? I mean, if I have a linear equation with one unknown, I know it's possible. So I'm just say possible and move on. In a problem-solving question, I actually have to solve it. So it takes time. But they're not really giving me more time. They're just removing all the data sufficiency questions and putting in slightly more problem-solving questions. The data sufficiency questions are now going to be moved to what's called the data insights section, because according to the GMAT and the feedback from the business schools, working with data is now very important. And I'm sure you understand that, right? Now everything's data. Even marketing is data, and logistics is data, and a lot of the things are basically data. So we need to be comfortable working with data. And that's why what the GMAT has done is it's taken the current integrated reasoning section, which is 12 questions. They've added data sufficiency questions from the problem-solving question. And now there's this new section called data insights, which is essentially the blend of the integrated reasoning questions and the data sufficiency questions. And now there are 20 questions. So kind of the good news is that data sufficiency questions usually take less time if you know what you're doing. So that's good news. The kind of bad news a little is that the overall time per question does get reduced quite significantly. We used to have 2.5 minutes. Now we have just over 2 minutes. So you need to know how to deal with these questions fairly quickly. What also would happen is that the data insight section, which is the old integrate reason section, is now going to become adaptive. It used to be not. And that's why most people didn't really take integrate reason section very seriously. But if you know what you're doing and if you are managing your time properly, you'll probably get a good score. Most of our students get scores of 6 or 7. Quite a large number of our students get scores of 8. So not that hard. Currently will become harder because it will be computer adaptive. Currently, the integrate reason section is non-adaptive, which means about half of the questions are easy. Going forward, there might be no easy questions at all because you always start in the middle. If you're answering the questions correctly, the questions just simply increase in difficulty. Now, there are a few little logistical differences between the tests, like when can you send the scores and things like that. You can read about this on MBA.com. At this juncture, it's probably not that important. What is important is that the test in terms of the question is for the large part the same. Oh, let me qualify what I'm saying. There will be no new questions right now added to the new test. Some questions from the old test gets removed, but no new questions get added. So if you've already been studying for the current test, do not worry, there's nothing new that you have to learn. You do have to get familiar with the fact that the exam is getting harder. And this new scoring is going to be not 200 to 800, it is 205 to 805. You're going to have 3 sections, data insights, quantitative reasoning, and verbal reasoning. They're all going to contribute towards the total score. Currently, it's only quantitative and verbal reasoning that contribute. Going forward, the data insights will also contribute to the total score. And the scores, the way they're calculated, is actually going to change quite a lot because there's been what's called an inflation. And I'm sure total inflation in grocery stores, and that's something that's quite painful for all of us. But there's also an inflation in the scores. When I did my test in early 2000s, it was very hard to get a score of 700. My score was 750, so it was like exceptional. Right now, about 13% of people get scores above 700. Going forward, the GMAT is going to go back to its roots. What this means is that the score of 705, which is basically the new 700, is now going to be 99th percentile. So only 1% of people will get scores 700 or more. There's going to be practically no one who is going to get scores above 725. Because the score of 730 or 735 is now equivalent to the new 800 score. And just for full disclosure, there are about 20 people worldwide who get scores of 800, 20 people across the entire world who currently get scores of 800. And of these 20 people, 20 are GMAT instructors. Not because they're smarter people, this is because they've been doing this for such a long time. So going forward, it will be practically impossible to get scores above 700. Now, I know that, of course, everybody will know that the scores are going to change. So the 700, the old 700 is the new 640 or 645, but there's still going to be a bit of a perception, right? Like if we meet at a certain party and I say, wow, I got score above 700, and somebody's going to say, well, I got above 600, there's still going to be a bit of an adjustment. So if you really want that 7 in front of your score, my advice, do the old test. Now you might be wondering, okay, when is this going to happen? So first of all, the official prep is already available. You can go on your favorite bookstore and actually buy the books. And I actually got the books about a week ago. We get them slightly before, actually a couple of weeks ago. We get them slightly earlier than the general public. So I got them about a week before they were released. We get them from the publisher just because, again, we belong to this small group of organizations. We are, of course, already adapting our course to the new exam because the there are no new questions. The way our courses are going to work from this moment on, our course, if you do end up taking our course, will prepare you for either the old or the new exam. Once the old exam is no longer available, we are going to be removing certain topics from our course. But currently, doesn't matter what test you're going to take, you can go ahead and take our course. And because our courses come with free retakes for a year, once our curriculum changes completely, you can still come back and have a refresher. You're going to be able to register for the new exam as of August 29th, and you can start taking the test sometime at the end of this year. The old exam is going to be available until sometime early next year. There's no exact date available, unfortunately, right now. But let's just say you have about 9 months to take the old test. And for most people, this is enough. I'll be honest with you. I've been teaching the GMAT for 14 years. I've had people who started with scores in the low 200s, for whom English was the third or the fourth language, with no math background, and sometimes with learning disabilities. And in about 6 to 7 months, they were able to break the 700 score. So anybody can do this. And the time that you have right now is enough if you are studying properly. Now, we already answered this question. Is the exam getting easier? I don't think so. Certainly, the scoring doesn't make the exam easier. The questions are still going to be the same. Some of the easier questions get removed. So it is going to be a shorter exam, not necessarily the easier exam. And if you're trying to decide which exam to take, my advice is, if you're planning to apply to a start date, an MBA start date of 2024, start now and try to do the current exam. If for whichever reason you're not successful or you need more time, you can always switch and take the new exam. Again, there are no new questions being added. You just have to forget sentence correction and geometry going forward. But certain schools have already announced that they will not be accepting the new GMAT focus for the 2024 applications, most notably Harvard. The Harvard Business School already announced that if you want to start your MBA in September 2024, you will need to take the current version of the GMAT. They just don't want to create a mess where some people are taking the old test, some people are taking the new test. So everybody needs to take the old test. And my advice is just try to take the old test if possible. Now the question is, okay, so how do I prepare? So I want to spend a few minutes talking about what resources could you use, what resources are actually available, and how do you actually get that 700 score or in the new exam 640 plus score. And as we go along through this, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box and I'll make sure we address them. I want to make sure that I finish that part of the presentation by in about 10 or 12 minutes, so that if you need to go, you can let go, but I will stay behind for another 15, 20 minutes if necessary, and I will continue answering your questions. So how do we prepare? What resources can I actually use? What I'd like to do is share my own experience, and then I'll share with you how you could structure your studies. So here's how my prep worked. I did my test well before ChatGPT in the early 2000s, and at that time, there weren't really too many coaching institutes available. So I just had some very limited access to different resources. One of the resources was MBA.com. So I just went on MBA.com and said, okay, what can I learn about the test? The scoring is 600 to 800. And what I did first is I did a practice test. And my first practice test, I scored 650. I honestly had no idea what to expect. I've never done the GMAT before. I was like, okay, let me take a practice test. Let me at least see where I'm starting from. And of course, I'm sharing this not just because that's what I did. That's what I usually recommend that you do as well. Just get familiar with the test. Take a practice test. Doesn't cost you anything. You can take one on our website, admitmaster.com, and you can go directly to trygmat.com. And here it is. I'm going to put this here in the chat box. And you can take a practice test completely free. I see a question here. How do we prepare for the data sufficiency question? I will talk about that as well. Thank you. I'll talk once we wrapped up. I'll give you some advice and we can have a discussion. So what was important for me is to understand what was missing and why did I not get a higher score. 650 is pretty good, but it'd be nice to have more. So I went through this, and what I realized is I was missing some terminology. For me personally, one of the challenges was I didn't know what's an isosceles triangle because I learned my math in a different language. English is my third language. So I had to review some of the terminology, and it took me a few days. And then I took the next practice test, and on that test, I scored 700. And I said, okay, that's pretty good. I can probably go ahead and book my real test. It was fairly easy at that time. There were not too many people taking the GMAT. So in about a week, I had my test date, and I scored 750 on a real test. Now, I'm the kind of person who gets very motivated by real challenge. Some people perform better on the real Olympics than they ever do, and they break world records, and they don't ever do that in their training. So I'm the kind of person like this with standardized tests. And the whole process from start to finish took me about 2 weeks. Here's my official score report. And just wanted to show you this 750. And this is my real score report, just to show you everything is legit. And I'm showing this not to impress you. It honestly impresses me. I think that was really cool. I was walking out of a test center, and the proctor was saying, wow, you got a 750. I said, wow, what does that mean? He said, oh, that's the top 1%. I said, wow, that's pretty cool. I said, yeah, congratulations. You're the only one in this week who got that. I said, wow, that's very impressive. So if you're wondering, I know Sergey is probably some sort of a genius. Let me break a bit of a GMAT myth here. I'm not. In fact, the reason why I did so well is it took me many years to learn these strategies. And I've been teaching the GMAT now for 14 years. And it took me even longer to teach other people, right? And I'm pretty good at what I do, and I love what I do. Many of my students got scores well above me, like 780, 790. But the reason why I was able to do so well, and again, I'm telling you this story because you need to do an assessment of your skills, and the practice that's going to help you. I got really lucky in school. I had amazing teachers. This was my math teacher. Honestly, this is the best teacher I've ever had in my life. When sometimes people come to me after the GMAT course and say, you know what, this is the best course I've ever taken in my life, or you are the best instructor I've ever taken in my life, I say, well, look, I had some really good teachers, right? So now this is my chance to continue the legacy. This gentleman, he just recently passed away at the age of 95, an amazing teacher, right? He taught me how to think differently. And this is something that could actually be learned. For me, it took many years because he was my teacher for 7 years in school, in my middle school and then high school. But here's an example. Daria, we met back in 2020, just when the pandemic started, and she just graduated from her undergraduate degree. And she said, look, I want to get into a really good school. Her goal was a Master of Finance at the London Business School, a very competitive program. She did a practice test and scored 380. And, some people are going to get really discouraged by 380, but she was like, look, I need to put in some work. So she said, what should I do? I'm not really good with math. And in about 3 months, she took our course. Our course is 6 weeks long, and she studied on her own afterwards for about 7 weeks. And by the way, that's what we normally recommend, right? Is you take a course early in your studies. I'll tell you exactly how you can structure your studies. And then she continued practicing. It's very important. She was doing practice tests every week. So she's probably done like about 6 or 7 practice tests. And then she went for her first attempt, 700, boom. And now she's actually already graduated from the Master of Finance at the London Business School. So it is possible. And what I wanted to highlight here in the comments that she left on Google for us, if you want to just Google us and see what people say, and there's some really good advice from people who've been studying, and sometimes people come with really low scores and get very, very high scores, and they actually share what they've done. And I'll share this with you actually by email if you register for our class. So send me an email, I can shoot you an email, and I can give you links to some of these comments. But here's what she said. I learned how to think outside the box. I learned how to manage my time and stress. And I learned how to think like a CEO. We call this here at Admit Masters thinking like a CEO. Because if you want to get into a business school, chances are at some point you want to become a CEO, right? Don't work too hard, make a lot of money, But what CEOs do is they are decision makers. They make decisions and they get paid really well for their decisions. So they have certain skills that other people don't. So you can start developing these skills through studying for the GMAT. That's what, when you come to Admit Master, that's really what we want, is we want you to walk away, not just with a high GMAT score, but with something that's going to help you in the MBA program, something that's going to help you in your career. Very often I get emails from our clients who say, look, I took your course and I haven't done my MBA yet, but as a result of the things I've learned, I got a job at McKinsey. So now I've taken a couple of years and now I'm coming back and now I'm ready to apply for a program. And we help with the application process as well. So we go back and we work with them on the application, on the actual essays and everything else. So the goal is really to help you move your career forward. The question is, how do you actually navigate that? Well, let me give you a few ideas. Again, I love analogies, so I'm going to give you a couple of analogies. See, when you're trying to do something new, that's kind of like walking into a corn maze. I have a 6-year-old at home and she loves corn mazes. So we go, especially in the summer, we live close to different farms. So we sometimes would go and we'll find our way. And of course, you don't see anything, right? So you just walk in and you can go left and right and you're just having fun. And sometimes you hit a roadblock and you go back and eventually you make it. So that's what we call the trial and error approach. And many people approach the GMAT the same way. They just say, okay, let me try different things. Let me try this seminar. Let me try these books. Let me try to meet with this person. And, let me try a couple of programs here and there and watch a few YouTube videos. And eventually, I'm hopefully going to figure out. And see, the trial and error approach works really well if we're trying to do something that has never been done before. For example, if we're trying to invent a light bulb, well, then the trial and error is really good. But if we're trying to do something that's already been done, that might not be the best approach. What I want to do instead is I just want to follow someone's advice. Well, let me put it this way. I'm not a very good cook. My wife is an amazing cook. I'm not. But certain things I do really well. The things I do really well in the kitchen are the things that follow an exact recipe. Like, for example, if I need to bake something, there's an exact process. And if I follow it, I get the exact result. Right? So that's exactly what you can do to do well in the GMAT. Now, most people, here's how they study for the GMAT. They say, okay, I need to do the test. Immediately what comes into my mind, test, I need a book. So what book do I need? These are the new books, the latest and greatest, the 2023, 2024 Focus Edition. And then they buy these books, they open them, and they realize, well, wait a second. There are a bunch of good questions here, but books don't really teach me how to do these questions. They don't teach me the tricks. They show me the questions. So some people then go and say, okay, I need some strategy books. And they go and invest in all these expensive GMAT books. And what they realize is that these books were actually written for GMAT courses. And not only that, none of them contain real questions from past exams because the GMAT does not permit republishing of the books, of the questions in the book. So if you go and buy that, Kaplan book, it doesn't have real questions. They're all made up. So many people then get overwhelmed with so many different books, so many different resources. And that's why I wanted to show you a graph that was actually, again, presented to us at one of the conferences for the GMAT. And that is, every year, approximately 7 million people want to go to a business school. Of them, about 2 million people will actually either buy a book or download the GMAT prep software. Of them, only 10% will actually end up doing the real test. And of them, right now, only 12 to 13% will actually get a good score. So many people, if you hear about, 13th percentile and things like that, the way the GMAT looks at it is say, well, that's just from the people who took the test. Many people don't. So statistically, if you and I are just simply thinking, well, it would be a really good idea to go to a business school, the chance of us getting a 700 plus score that will probably open the doors to some of these best business schools is just 1 in 300. Not a very good chance, right? So how can we improve our chances? Well, one of the things we could do is we can actually have a map, essentially a plan. And if you're willing to sign up for a one-on-one consultation, I will share with you a map. I will actually share with you the steps you can take. Whether you come to us or whether you do this on your own, I will give you the exact steps you can take. And for some of you, you might say, well, look, my time's valuable. So why don't I go on a journey with someone who can show me exactly how to do that, right? Let me give you an analogy. I love traveling. So sometimes I go to a new city, and recently I was in the Netherlands, and I just walk around, and Amsterdam's really amazing. But then I said, you know what? I'd really love to know a little bit more about the history and what these old things mean. So I took a trip for a day around Amsterdam and the surrounding area. And it was so much better than walking by myself, because somebody actually guided me and said, look here, this is what you can see in this building. And I went, wow, that's amazing. So instead of me reading a bunch of books, somebody's going to just guide me. So that's what some of you might decide to do as well. And if you do, then you can come and join us. So let me share with you how you could possibly do this. Now, we offer live GMAT prep courses. Our next course actually starts tonight. You know, after we're done, I have another seminar with one of our partner business schools in Toronto, and then I'm actually going to teach the course later this evening. So if you do decide to come and join us, I would encourage you to go to admitmaster.com/offer, read a little bit more about that. There's an option to pre-book your seat. I will actually call you if you want to join our course, and we can talk a little bit more about how things might work. But the thing is, we are a medium-sized company. If you look at some of the other companies, they are, for example, Kaplan is owned by Washington Post, which is owned by Jeff Bezos, right? And I have a lot of respect for Jeff Bezos, but honestly, I wouldn't want to study for the GMAT with Jeff Bezos because he's not going to care about my success. Whereas we work with a lot of business schools, a lot of organizations like Prep Advisors, because we really care. So we don't leave our students. If you need help, we're going to help you, right? And you're actually going to talk to a real instructor, not some 1-800 number. We also give you lots of free resources. You can come back and retake our course for free for 1 year. We give you some personal coaching. There are office hours every week where we go through a bunch of questions together. So there's lots of support. There are also some self-study options. For example, you could either study completely on your own, which is what we call the GMAT Express self-prep, or you could work with the instructor, where the instructor can guide you through the whole process. You're not going to come to live class. So there are many options, right? And sometimes I would meet with people and say, look, I don't think the live course is right for you, or honestly, you don't need any prep. So if you want, go on our website, take the practice test, send me an email, we can go over it. I'll give you some advice. Look, I don't buy, I'm retired. I already had a pretty successful corporate career. Now I'm just doing this for the sake of helping people, and I am getting paid well. So, it's kind of everybody wins. So I'm happy to volunteer my time to help you. And we do keep track of the success of our students. On average, our students currently get scores of 670, and about a third of our students get scores of 700 or more. Because we make you think of this as kind of like a boot camp, but it takes a few weeks, where we really go over things and we teach you different skills of how things are going to work. So I wanted to go you just real quick on one quick journey with me, and actually show you the skills that we're going to be teaching you. And then I'll stay behind and I'll answer the question. So just one final thing that I wanted to do with you is show you a GMAT question. I love this question. So here's the question. It says, Aaron will jog from home at X miles an hour and then walk back home by the same route at Y miles an hour. How many miles from home can Aaron jog so he spends a total of T hours jogging and walking? Whew, okay, I don't know about you, but most people are probably going to read this a few times and say, okay, well, wait a second, what does it mean? Jogging and walking. Why is he jogging and walking? And okay, X and Y. It'd be really nice to have some numbers, maybe 5 miles an hour, 10 miles an hour, but T hours, what does that mean? And then you look at the answer choices and the stress level starts going up. Because I'd like to have some numbers, but X plus T over XY. Okay, so how would I even tackle this question? And what many people do is they're going to say, okay, well, I remember there were some formulas, right? And I remember there's this formula, distance is equal to rate times time. So, I need the distance, but, they're giving me rate from home, which is the jogging of X, but I don't really know the time. So maybe we'll call it T1. And then there's a distance going there, and then there's a distance going back. The times together, they give me just the total time. They're telling me the distances are the same, so it's the same route. And I can probably just start working with these equations. I have a bunch of variables, so more variables than I would love to. And then when I give this question to people in the live class, then usually after about 5 minutes, people are saying, well, okay, show me how to do this. I'm not really getting anywhere. So how can I do this question a lot quicker? Is it even possible? And yes, so this is when, see, sometimes and very often you may have heard that we have blind spots, right? Which means we don't know what we don't know. So we do this question and say, okay, here's how we do this question. But if somebody says, okay, actually, here's how you do this question. So let me show you what else you could have done. So knowing the distance equal to rate times time is helpful. In fact, if I'm driving from, let's say, to, say I'm driving from Paris to Berlin. And let's say I'm driving at 100 kilometers an hour and say it takes me 10 hours. Well, I know the distance is going to be 1,000, 100 times 10. It's very easy math. Everybody knows that because they haven't driven a car. So we always multiply speed by time to get to the distance. We don't do anything else. We don't, for example, add them, right? What if I were to say, okay, 100 kilometers an hour, let's add 10 hours. The answer is 110. You say, well, it makes no sense. But let's take a look at the answer choices. Answer choice B takes speed X and adds time T. I think this makes no sense. How can we add speed and time? So B is not the right answer. Are there any other answer choices that add speed and time? Well, how about D? X plus Y plus T. How about E? Y plus T. So these cannot be correct answers, right? Can never add speed and time. Can multiply them. Yeah, that's not bad. But adding them makes no sense. So now I'm down to two answer choices, A and C. Notice how much math have I done so far. And again, just like we said, there's only one correct answer. So I can look at the one that's simpler. And if it's correct, that's good. If it's incorrect, that's the other one. So let me take a look at, let's say, A. It looks a little simpler, right? So what does A give me? It gives me X divided by Y, which is essentially the ratio of two speeds, which is just a number. What's a ratio? Somebody's twice as old as someone else. So the ratio of their ages is 2. So it's not 2 years, it's just 2, right? So if I divide two speeds, I just get a number. And I multiply this by T, which actually gives me hours. But wait a second. I don't need hours, I need miles. So is A the correct answer? No, it is not. What's left? C. The only answer that's left, it has to be the correct answer, and I can do this in 30 seconds. Really not with a lot of math, right? I don't pretty much need any math for that question. So that requires, again, a bit of a different approach, and it requires developing some confidence. Let me give you one final example, and then I'll take some questions. Here's Darini. She came to us. Actually, she was in the same class with Daria, funny enough. We have thousands of people, but I remember them too. It was interesting. They were both in the course that was the first course during the pandemic. She just graduated from Oxford Side MBA. And the story is she was already on the older side of the applications. So she wanted to do her MBA for a while, and the time was almost running out. She was in her early 30s. So, at some point you just move on, right? And not do the MBA at all. And the reason why she hasn't done the MBA so far is she really struggled with the GMAT. She tried to study for a while, but the GMAT always gave her a very high level of anxiety. So she just couldn't deal with it. And then eventually somebody recommended that she come and take our course. And she came and said, look, I just want to warn you. I'll probably have to take the exam at least 3 times. And it's very stressful for me. So I'm going to need to have some special accommodations, basically. I'm going to need you to teach me how to overcome the anxiety. And we did a few things, because whenever you come to a class, there's a lot of personal coaching. So we developed a plan for her of how she can actually overcome the anxiety while gradually building up her skills. She booked 3 exams. She paid for them because she needed a plan to lower her anxiety. She went for the first test. She walked out of there and they said she got a 700. She's like, that's impossible. I've never got a 700 on my practice test. So how is this even possible? But she developed so much confidence, so much trust in the system, and she was motivated by the real challenge that she actually sent me an email after the day after the test. She said, against all odds. This was the subject matter in all caps. And I'm like, Darini, what happened? She said, just got a 700. Here's a picture of my score report. I'm like, wow, congratulations, this is amazing. Said, maybe I can do the MBA now. And we actually helped her get in that year, and she actually just graduated. I was in London a couple of weeks ago, and I met her, and she works for the United Nations. So just an amazing story if you stay motivated. So ladies and gentlemen, if you are the kind of person who's saying, I want to take my career to the next level, I don't want to be at risk of my job being decimated by AI. I want to invest in the skills that are going to help me going forward. I want to invest in managerial skills, people skills, reasoning skills. I want to become a future CEO or maybe a future manager. Then I would like to invite you to commit to mastering the GMAT. The GMAT is a test that's specially designed for the business schools. And if you are really committed, you can come and join us in our live classes. If you're still exploring your options, then you of their online self-study programs. You can also come to our refresher classes. The next free refresher class is on June 21st. We also offer a lot of different information sessions. We offer different workshops on the application process. For example, tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern time, which is New York time, we're going to be offering a free workshop on your LinkedIn makeover. And you can find actually all of that, including the free practice test, at admitmaster.com/offer. Most importantly, I'd love to help, just as my gift to you for being very committed and coming here today. So please get in touch and I'll do my very best to help you. If you come to our class, I'd love to have you in the class. If we can simply connect and maybe we can connect on LinkedIn and we can stay in touch and I can help you a little bit with your process. We can spend 15, 20 minutes. I'd love to do that. So if you have any questions, just let me know. We have a few more minutes left, but I'd like to answer a few of your questions. What should students do in order not to forget what they have studied for the exams? So really good point. The thing is that the GMAT is a skills-based test, not the knowledge-based test. I've done my test and I started studying about 7 years later. I pretty much remembered everything. You just need to continue practicing. This is not the test where, I don't know about you, but I went to physics university. So I remember I was doing an exam on particle physics, and it was really difficult. And I just had to remember so many things about particles. And I remember I was studying very intensively a week before the test because there's no way I'm going to remember this, right? I have lots of other things I need to take care of. So that's what I did. But with the GMAT, it's a graduate building up the skills. I went to middle school and high school. I'd learned all these skills. And then probably 10 years later, I did my test. And I'm like, boom, it already clicked in. So it's important that you continue practicing these skills more and more and more. And once you realize the skills aren't just about the area of a trapezoid, it's about knowing how to deal with these questions. You are going to be so much more successful in applying these skills. Now, somebody was asking on the new test, do we get to choose which of the 3 sections to start with? Yes. So on the new test, you can actually do the sections in any order, and you're also going to be given a 1 10-minute break. You can either take it after the first section or after the second section. Each section is 45 minutes. So you can do 45 minutes of test, then a break, then 2 sections in a row, or you can do 2 sections first, then take a break, and then 1 section. So it's very flexible, and you can do them in any order as well. Mark was asking, how can you give advice on how to prepare for the data sufficiency section? Yes, so data sufficiency section is a section where you need to have a conceptual understanding of how math works. For example, you need to understand certain concepts. Let me give you an example of, let's say, a concept of divisibility. Now, this is one of the most widely tested concepts. And the GMAT can give you these questions in a variety of different ways. For example, they could ask whether A is a multiple of B. They can ask whether B is a factor of A. They can ask you whether B goes into A, whether A divides B. They can even say, if you have a group of A people that are trying to divide into B, B teams, could you actually divide them evenly so that every team has the same number of people? Same idea. They're basically asking whether A is divided by B. So knowing how to recognize these patterns and identifying exactly what the question is asking is your first step. And then all you need to do is actually understand the process. There is the actual reasoning process of how you can go through the data sufficiency question. Again, just like I said, ask yourself a series of questions just so that you can narrow down the number of your options. So there's essentially a little decision tree or little decision chart. The actual process, you just go step by step. Okay, let me ask the first question. Okay, what's this question about? What is it testing? What is it asking me? Right? And then you just go, and there's not a long process. There's usually just about 5 or 6 questions that you ask yourselves, and that's how you get the answer. So that's how you would essentially prepare. You need to understand the concepts. That's very important. What's divisibility? How do you understand whether one number is divisible by another number? It's much more about how the numbers work. Sometimes people ask me, can you teach me how to do a long division? I said, the last time I've done long division was probably about 30 years ago. So I guess not. They ask me, well, how do you teach the GMAT? So, well, I know how the process works. I know how to understand whether one number is divisible by another number. I don't actually need to do that. I've never needed to do that on the GMAT. So, who cares? Or one multiplication. I just, again, need to understand, okay, so you multiply some digits and you carry things over. And I actually understand how to do it. I understand the steps. And understanding the steps is enough for me to answer the question, especially data sufficiency questions, right? So if I have a linear equation with one unknown, I know I can solve for it. I don't need to do it. I know I could. And if I have a quadratic equation, I also need to know that, well, look, sometimes I have one solution, sometimes I have 2. So again, that's important to understand. So that's how you can prepare, ladies and gentlemen. I see no more questions. So thanks so much. Please keep in touch. And I wish you all the best in your preparation.